No one saw it coming. Not the press, not the palace, not even Harry. But in the middle of the storm, Princess Anne made a move that stunned the royal inner circle. She went to Meghan. It wasn't supposed to happen, not after everything that had been said, printed, and aired across the world. Meghan Markle had not only stepped away from the royal family, she'd slammed the door behind her. And Princess Anne, the unwavering defender of royal tradition, had made it crystal clear where her loyalties stood. For years, Anne had been viewed as the immovable pillar of the monarchy, unshaken, unapologetic, and fiercely protective of the crown. So, when whispers surfaced that she had quietly flown across the Atlantic to meet Meghan in California alone and unannounced, it felt like a glitch in the royal matrix. But this wasn't just a random visit. This was something deeper, something personal. Anne didn't travel lightly. She didn't act on impulse. The very idea that she, the Queen's most trusted daughter, would step into Meghan's territory without the knowledge of Charles or Camilla sent shockwaves through the royal corridors. What drove her to do it? Was it guilt? A royal mission? A dying wish from the late Queen herself? Or was it a last-ditch attempt to mend a fracture that had grown too wide to ignore? What's even more unsettling is the silence that followed. No statements. No leaks from the palace. No staged photos to spin the narrative. Just an eerie stillness that only fueled the speculation. Because if Anne did indeed visit Meghan, then everything we thought we knew about the monarchy's internal war might be wrong. Maybe Anne wasn't just a cold enforcer. Maybe she was carrying a secret, a burden, one that she could no longer ignore, one that demanded action, and maybe, just maybe, Meghan wasn't the enemy she had been painted to be. But what exactly did Anne hope to accomplish? Was she there to extend an olive branch? Or was it a warning dressed in civility? And why now, after the coronation, after the spectacle, after Meghan's absence had been framed as another act of defiance? The timing wasn't just suspicious, it was deliberate. The visit, if true, could be the moment that changes the monarchy's trajectory forever. And the answer to why Anne went lies buried in the ruins of the coronation drama. To understand why this visit shattered royal silence, we must revisit the storm Meghan left behind in London. While Charles wore his crown, Meghan's absence was louder than any choir. The cameras focused on the golden thrones, the ancient rituals, and the glimmering jewels. But what echoed most in that cathedral wasn't the coronation hymn. It was the void, the very visible absence of the Duchess of Sussex. And that silence wasn't an oversight. It was a message. From the moment Meghan confirmed she wouldn't attend Charles's coronation, the royal stage shifted. Whispers became thunder. She claimed it was Archie's birthday that kept her away, but no one really believed that, not in a family that operates in symbolism and shadows. Her absence was defiance. A public rejection of a monarchy that had once crowned her a royal and later cast her as a villain. But even as Meghan made headlines for not being there, another royal was commanding attention without saying a word: Princess Anne. Anne stood like a sentinel throughout the coronation, armored in ceremonial regalia, her expression unreadable, her purpose clear. She was loyalty incarnate, and when she rode on horseback behind the king, she wasn't just fulfilling a duty, she was drawing a line in the sand. But what caught the world's attention wasn't her sword or sash, it was her feather. That tall, theatrical plume perched atop her hat, which, whether by accident or design, completely blocked Harry from view during the televised ceremony. That single image set the internet ablaze. Feathergate, they called it. A meme, a metaphor, a message. Meghan may have stayed away, but Anne had ensured Harry would stay invisible. Inside Meghan's circle, the gesture wasn't taken lightly. Her team reportedly called it a royal snub made for the cameras. They saw it not as coincidence, but calculation, a pointed reminder that even Harry's blood couldn't shield him from royal ice. And Anne, she didn't flinch, she didn't apologize, she didn't even blink. Because Princess Anne doesn't operate in apologies. She operates in unspoken codes. And in that moment, she was the embodiment of a system that refused to break, even when fractured. In royal circles, Anne had long been seen as the silent enforcer. She didn't speak out in interviews. She didn't leak to the press. She acted. And when she acted, the palace listened. To Meghan, she represented the final barricade, the one royal she could never bend, never charm, never win over. But something strange happened after the coronation. As the headlines faded and the thrones returned to the shadows, a new current stirred beneath the surface. Because Anne, stoic, steely, and sworn to the crown, began to question whether silence was strength or cowardice. But behind palace walls, Anne had begun questioning if silence had gone too far. Before Queen Elizabeth passed, she left Anne with a burden no one else knew. It wasn't written into a will, it wasn't spoken before cameras, it was delivered quietly, in the final weeks of a reign that had stretched across generations. A mother's last request, a queen's unspoken command. Elizabeth had ruled with poise, with patience, and when necessary with silence. But as her life drew to a close, she understood the storm her departure would leave behind. And in that storm, she entrusted just one person with the task of holding the family together: Anne. It wasn't about titles, it wasn't about lands or crowns. What the Queen left behind for Anne wasn't material, it was moral, a duty far heavier than gold. Because Anne wasn't just Elizabeth's only daughter, she was her confidant, her mirror, the one royal who didn't bend, didn't flinch, and never needed applause to feel complete. And so it was Anne who inherited something the others never saw coming: a final, private mission. To protect the very idea of family before it shattered for good. To do what Charles couldn't, what William wouldn't, and what Harry no longer could. The Queen had watched it all happen: Diana's unraveling, Harry's rebellion, Meghan's exile. She saw how history had a cruel way of repeating itself, and she feared that if no one acted, another generation would be lost to bitterness. Elizabeth, ever the strategist, knew the monarchy could survive scandal, but it could not survive emotional extinction. And Meghan, for all the chaos, still carried something precious: the future. Through Archie and Lilibet flowed Windsor blood. Through them, the Queen's legacy lived on, whether the crown acknowledged it or not. Anne, stoic and battle-hardened, had never been sentimental. But she understood history. She had seen firsthand how silence devoured Diana, and she had watched Harry and Meghan flee into the arms of an unkind press, burning every bridge behind them. Yet something in her shifted when the Queen died. Maybe it was grief, maybe it was guilt, but deep inside, Anne could feel the burden tightening. She could feel time running out. Meghan had become a ghost in palace corridors, a name not spoken aloud, a presence that lingered without form. But ghosts have a way of haunting legacies, and Anne could no longer pretend the silence would protect the crown. So she began to see Meghan not as a traitor, but as a test of whether the monarchy could evolve beyond punishment and pride, a test only she could take. Because unlike Charles, Anne didn't need approval. Unlike Camilla, she didn't need protection. And unlike William, she had nothing to prove. That made her dangerous, and it made her free. The Queen's burden wasn't about mending the past. It was about safeguarding the future. And if that meant crossing enemy lines, so be it. Anne would do it alone, quietly, without permission. So, under the radar, and without palace approval, Anne did what no one expected. No press, no guards, just Anne, a chartered flight, and a mission cloaked in secrecy. The kind of mission no royal admits to. The kind that doesn't appear on official schedules or get documented by palace aides. It was quiet, deliberate, and executed with military precision, because that's the only way Anne knew how to move. For the first time in decades, the Princess Royal disappeared from radar, and no one in the palace was briefed on where she had gone or why. Her departure was hidden beneath the perfect cover, an extended equestrian retreat in the English countryside. A few vague comments about health and time away from public duties. But behind the scenes, something else was unfolding. Anne had arranged for a discreet charter out of Northolt. No markings, no crest. Just her and one trusted aide who knew how to keep their mouth shut. Within hours, she was airborne heading west. Not to Washington, not to Ottawa, but to California. And not for any royal tour or diplomatic mission. This was personal, unofficial, and dangerous. She landed without ceremony. No convoy, no photographers, no royal standard fluttering above a luxury hotel. Anne vanished into the golden sprawl of Southern California under complete silence. What followed was even more startling. She didn't go to Meghan and Harry's Montecito estate. She didn't walk through the infamous gates the tabloids had plastered across the globe. Instead, sources claim she met Meghan at a private residence, rented and secured through intermediaries. A place far away from the royal glare, far away from Harry, because, astonishingly, he wasn't even there. That detail alone raised more questions than answers. Why would Anne go to see Meghan and not Harry? Was it intentional? Had she wanted to speak to Meghan without interference? Or had Harry refused to attend? No answers came. But days later, a royal staffer, one who had worked with Anne for over 2 decades, allegedly confided in a close friend that something monumental had occurred in California. A whisper. A leak. That one conversation ignited a wildfire across royal watching communities. Forums, comment sections, anonymous sources all pointing to the same chilling conclusion: Anne had broken ranks, and Meghan had received her in silence. The meeting, by all accounts, lasted over 3 hours. 3 hours of unscheduled, undocumented, and unrecorded conversation between two of the most polarizing women in modern royal history. No footage, no confirmation, just speculation and a growing sense that something had shifted in the shadows of the monarchy. What could they have said? What truths were exchanged? Were apologies made, or ultimatums delivered? No one knows for certain. But what happened behind those closed doors wasn't just a conversation. It was a reckoning. And it would not stay buried forever. But what happened during those 3 hours would echo back to the palace with more force than anyone expected. This was no friendly tea party, it was a royal reckoning. The air between them wasn't filled with smiles or scripted courtesies. It was thick with everything left unsaid over the past 4 years. Betrayal, grief, anger. Two women born into vastly different worlds, now standing face to face. Not as strangers, but as symbols of everything the monarchy had failed to resolve. And it was Anne who broke the silence first. Her voice was measured, not cold, but deliberate. She looked Meghan in the eye and said, "You've already made history. What you do next decides your legacy." The words hung in the air like a sword. Meghan, who had spent years defending her truth to the world, suddenly looked disarmed. For a moment, the Duchess, so often seen as composed and fierce, cracked. Her voice wavered, her eyes filled. She spoke not as a headline, not as a media figure, but as a woman who'd been pushed to the edge. She told Anne how the Oprah interview had started as a plea for truth, but spiraled into a wildfire of unintended consequences. How she had felt cornered, unheard, and deliberately silenced by a family that claimed to represent unity. How every time she spoke out, the world twisted her voice into poison. But Anne didn't soften. She didn't offer the validation Meghan longed for. Instead, she issued a challenge cloaked as concern. She told Meghan the crown was bigger than any single person, that with every accusation, every interview, and every insinuation, the monarchy wasn't just being wounded, it was being tested. Anne didn't beg for peace, she demanded responsibility. She told Meghan to think not just of herself, but of her children, of what it would mean for Archie and Lilibet to grow up with one foot in royal blood and the other in royal resentment. Meghan, tearful now, didn't back down. She demanded something in return: acknowledgement, not of her titles, not of her service, but of her pain, of what she'd endured behind palace walls. She wasn't asking for reinstatement. She was asking to be seen, to be heard, to be believed. And in response, Anne did something no one expected. She listened. She didn't defend. She didn't dismiss. But she made one thing clear. The crown doesn't apologize, Anne said flatly. But sometimes, it listens. That was the closest Meghan would get to a royal concession. It wasn't what she wanted, but it was something. The meeting had stripped them both down. Titles had vanished. Only wounds remained. And as Anne stood to leave, Meghan sat in silence, unsure whether she had just received a threat, a warning, or the first hint of reconciliation. But what she did know, with absolute certainty, was that nothing would be the same after that day. When Anne returned home, she wasn't the same, and neither was the future of the firm. When Charles learned of Anne's secret journey, he didn't react with rage. He reacted with silence, a silence that chilled the room. Those closest to the king knew this wasn't the calm before the storm. It was the storm itself, quiet, calculating, dangerous. Charles, a monarch obsessed with control and protocol, had just discovered that the one person he trusted, above all, had gone rogue. Anne hadn't just bypassed protocol. She had bypassed him. And that betrayal cut deeper than any public scandal. It wasn't just the secrecy that unsettled him. It was the message. Anne's visit to Meghan wasn't political, it was symbolic. A direct challenge to the unspoken plan the king had spent years constructing. A plan to tighten the ranks, restore the monarchy's image, and systematically distance the institution from the chaos Harry and Meghan had brought. Camilla, who had grown bolder in her role as queen consort, was livid. To her, this wasn't a sibling squabble, it was sabotage. She had worked tirelessly to ensure Meghan's name faded from palace lips, erased from public memory. And now Anne, of all people, had gone and breathed life back into the one name she wanted buried. Inside the palace, the temperature dropped. Anne returned to her duties as if nothing had happened. She gave no interviews, issued no statements, but the halls buzzed. Advisors were split. Some called her move courageous, an attempt to salvage family ties before it was too late. Others whispered that she'd overstepped, risked the crown's hard-earned stability, and undermined Charles's rule. In the shadows of royal diplomacy, even a private conversation could be a political earthquake. Then came William, the heir, the strategist. Unlike his father, he didn't see Anne's actions as rebellion. Privately, he was said to have approved, because William, more than anyone, understood the cost of unchecked division. Meghan's interviews had inflicted reputational wounds, but she still held power, dangerous power. And if there was even a chance that Anne's visit could neutralize future PR disasters, William was willing to quietly support it. He didn't need headlines, he needed results. But not everyone was informed. Harry, thousands of miles away, found out the way he found out most things secondhand. And what stung wasn't just that Anne had gone to see Meghan, it was that she hadn't come to see him. He felt blindsided, betrayed, forgotten. The woman who had once helped guide him as a child had now made a move that excluded him entirely. And once again, the invisible chasm between Harry and the rest of the firm widened. Behind palace gates, something was shifting. It wasn't just Anne's actions that caused unrest. It was the ripple effect, the way power realigned in whispers and glances, inside doors and secret meetings. A new phase had begun. New alliances were forming. Old strategies were being rewritten. The monarchy, already fractured, was mutating behind the curtain. And not even Charles, crowned and stoic, could stop what had been set in motion. But the real shock wasn't what Anne did, it was what Meghan did next. Weeks later, Meghan emerged, but something had changed. The fire was dimmer. The words were softer. She wasn't the headline chaser anymore, nor the wounded royal crying out against the institution. Something inside her had shifted, quietly but unmistakably. And the world noticed. Because when Meghan Markle speaks, people listen not just for what she says, but how she says it. And in a rare interview that followed Anne's secret visit, Meghan uttered a phrase that sent shockwaves through royal circles. "There's one royal who surprised me." She didn't name names. She didn't need to. The message was crystal clear to those watching closely. For years, Meghan's relationship with the firm had been framed in absolutes, her truth versus their silence, her trauma versus their tradition. But now, that line had blurred. Gone were the direct accusations, the strategic digs, the Netflix-level confrontations. In their place stood something more complex, a pause, a recalibration, a whisper that perhaps not every bridge had burned to ash. The tabloids scrambled for answers. Had Anne's intervention changed the narrative? Had that mysterious 3-hour conversation reawakened a sense of duty, or empathy, or caution? In the weeks that followed, Meghan's public moves seemed to echo this transformation. Her team pivoted away from palace-centric drama. No new interviews, no new documentaries. Instead, the headlines began focusing on philanthropy, community work, and high-profile fashion events. Meghan was reclaiming her space, but not with rage. With restraint, behind the scenes rumors grew louder. Sources claimed private letters had been exchanged between Meghan and Princess Anne. Not formal correspondence stamped with protocol, but handwritten notes, raw and personal. Notes that, according to insiders, spoke not just of pain, but of hope. If true, it would mark the first time since their explosive royal exit that Meghan had opened a channel to a senior royal on her own terms. And that royal wasn't Charles, it wasn't William, it was Anne. But Anne, as always, kept her mouth shut. No press releases, no denials. Just silence the kind that speaks louder than words. She returned to her duties with her usual force and discipline, refusing to fan the flames. Because Anne never sought attention, she sought results. And for once, it looked like her quiet diplomacy had worked in a way no crown or title could. The speculation was impossible to ignore. Could it be that Anne's unorthodox move had succeeded where palace protocol failed? Had her honesty, her severity, her refusal to apologize, but willingness to engage, reached Meghan in a place deeper than any royal decree ever could? The palace, watching from the shadows, didn't dare react. Because now, something fragile was unfolding, something they couldn't control with statements or symbolism. And now, the firm watches closely, because what happens next could either reunite or ruin the royals forever. In a monarchy built on silence, one secret visit may have been the loudest act of all. It didn't come with trumpets or press releases, it came with risk, with quiet rebellion, with the kind of courage the crown rarely rewards but always remembers. And as the dust settled, the consequences of Princess Anne's unapproved journey stretched far beyond the confines of that 3-hour meeting. Because what she did wasn't just personal, it was political, symbolic. It redrew the lines of royal influence in a way no coronation or title ever could. Anne stepped into a void Charles couldn't fill. For all his power, all his ceremonial weight, Charles has never been able to bridge the divide between old-world monarchy and modern family fractures. Where he hesitated, Anne acted. Where others clung to rules, Anne followed instinct. In doing so, she became more than just the Queen's daughter, she became the unexpected architect of a fragile peace. Her visit to Meghan wasn't sanctioned, but it was significant. It proved something even the most hardened royal watchers forgot. That sometimes, it takes a rule breaker to preserve tradition. And now, Meghan may hold something the crown can't fabricate, leverage rooted in emotion. For all the accusations, all the press wars, and all the drama, this quiet act of engagement may have cracked open a door no royal decree could budge. Meghan now stands at a crossroads with a bridge that didn't exist before, one built not on protocol, but on one woman's decision to show up, unarmed, and listen. Whether Meghan chooses to cross it or burn it is a question that will define the monarchy's future. But something else happened, too. Something the world didn't expect. Anne changed. To many, she had always been the monarchy's iron gatekeeper, stoic, sharp, unforgiving. But in this rare move, she revealed something few had seen before: empathy. And not just empathy, but responsibility. She didn't have to go. She chose to. That act alone shifted public perception. Suddenly, the coldest royal wasn't so cold. She was strategic, calculated, human. This moment exposed something bigger than Anne or Meghan. It revealed the crown's deepest vulnerability, that it still relies on people, not just palaces. That behind the robes and rituals, the monarchy survives on connection, on human instinct. And in today's world, where loyalty can't be inherited and respect can't be demanded, the institution must now reckon with a truth long buried. Emotional diplomacy is its final defense. Harry remains caught in the eye of this storm. His path is murkier than ever, pulled between the woman he fought for, the family he fled from, and the legacy he still bears whether he wants it or not. He's no longer the prince who walked away. He's the one left staring at the wreckage, unsure which side still wants him. The monarchy's survival no longer hinges on grandeur or bloodlines. It hinges on what happens in hushed rooms, on what's said behind closed doors, and most of all, on the choices made when no one's watching. Because sometimes, the conversations that never make headlines are the only ones that matter. And if this secret visit truly happened, what else has the firm been hiding behind its golden gates? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.